So, a very good evening, dear students. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the news analysis. So, we have been discussing important topics every day. So, today also we have some more important topics, and they are important for your prelims and mains examination. So, one by one, we'll try to discuss all these important articles. However, if you look at today's important news articles, so we will be discussing about India's urbanization. So if you look at the syllabus of mains examination in Gender Studies paper 3, urbanization as a topic has been asked. So in fact, urban development is a very important topic for the mains examination in Gender Studies paper 1. And as part of this, we will understand what is the localization of the urban plans and what are the initiatives that the government has launched so far, and what is the performance of those initiatives with respect to urban development, not just urban development but a sustainable urban development. So what are the challenges that the urbanization has been facing and what should be the way forward? So we will understand this in a very detailed manner. And the second important article is with respect to the heat action plans. Now, heat wave has become a frequent phenomenon. Particularly during summers in India, heat wave become a very common and a very frequent phenomena. And heat wave, and this particular topic of heat wave is important for your prelims examination as well as your mains examination. That includes Gender Studies paper 1 as well as Gender Studies paper 3 as well. So as part of this, we will understand what exactly is heat wave and how heat waves are formed, and what is heat wave action plans, and how Indian cities need to adopt these heat wave action plans so that the Indian cities' vulnerability to intense heat waves can be substantially reduced. So this is the second topic, and the third topic is IAS Sagar is a made in India Africa exercise. So we will be looking into the India Africa maritime relations, and we will also understand what is this IAS Sagar. And similarly, for prelims examination, we will understand the differences between the finance bill and also the money bill, because recently a debate in the Lok Sabha with respect to finance bill that is concerned with the union budget has been taking place. So therefore we'll try to understand the differences between the finance bill as well as money bill, and this could be a very important question for your prelims examination. So without any further delay, let's get into the discussion. As I have already told you that we have to discuss the localized urban agenda. So why India needs a localized urban agenda? Because urbanization is a very important phenomenon in India. So first of all, we would look into this, why urbanization is considered as a very important phenomenon in India. So according to an estimate, in India, more than 60% of GDP is contributed. More than 60% of the GDP is contributed by the urban centers. They are contributed by the urban centers. And similarly, urbanization, they are called as growth engines. They are called as growth engines. And in urban areas, population density has been substantially increasing. And because of the huge importance of urban areas, the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act and also the performance of the municipalities is also came to the limelight. So how municipalities have been performing particularly with respect to the urban planning, and in recent times, due to poor urban planning, the vulnerability of the cities to various natural disasters or man-made disasters has been substantially increasing. And because of that particular reason, urbanization has came to the limelight, and why we need to have a localized urban agenda, and that could address the existing challenges that the urban areas have been facing, right? So we'll be discussing that in a very detailed manner. So if you look at India's urban centers, so we can say that India has been experiencing rapid urbanization, right? This is the phenomena that we can see in India, that we have been observing rapid urbanization. So limitless urbanization is what we have been experiencing in our urban areas. However, it is expected that India's urban population is going to become the world's largest. India's urban population is going to become world largest. So according to 2011 census, it is expected that around 29% of India's population have been living in the urban areas. So however, it is expected that this number will substantially increase in the coming years, right? So population density is a one reason where we need to have a localized urban agenda, because see, with the excessive population, what generally happen is that the crowded urban centers and associated urban pollution, and along with the urban pollution there may be other challenges also. For example, development or growth of slums in the urban areas, and traffic congestion in the urban areas, and stress or pressure on the existing or scarce resources in those urban areas. So this is also another major problem, right? And unemployment is a major problem, lack of sanitation and hygiene, affordable housing. So these are all the problems with the excessive population in urban areas, right? So we have to look these urban centers with the local context, and that is what is called as the localized urban agenda. So there is no doubt that these urban areas are going to face a lot of challenges in the future. So therefore there is a need to address those challenges by what? Through the localized urban planning. So we have to adopt a localized urban planning so that we can address the existing problems that the urban areas have been facing, and at the same time we can continue the the image of these urban areas. We can continue the prospects of these urban areas as the growth engines of Indian economy. So I hope it is clear for you. Now understand that for the urban development, particularly the sustainable urban development, the union government has launched many schemes. So we all knew those basic schemes that the union government has launched in the urban areas. For example, Awas Yojana scheme. So Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana schemes with the primary objective of affordable housing for the urban poor, and secondly the Swachh Bharat mission, and that focuses on sanitation and hygiene component, and Amrut program, and even the smart cities program. So these are some initiatives that are launched by the central government. And the other thing that you should remember is urban development, urban planning is considered as a state subject in the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution, right? So therefore urban development and urban planning is the primary responsibility of the respective state governments. So despite it is the state's responsibilities, keeping in mind the importance of the urban areas, the central government has launched many such important initiatives. However, the problem with the existing urban planning is that many have been considering that the existing urban planning is top down urban planning and also one size fits all approach. So this top down urban planning, top down urban development and one size fits all approach very often ignores the specific needs of different cities, because different cities have different needs. And when you are adopting the top down approach instead of the bottom up approach, so it is very important that for the urban planning, for the urban development, so we need to adopt bottom up planning. But here the problem is top down urban planning and one size fits all approach. So instead of this one size fits all approach, why don't we adopt the localized urban agenda? So that would benefit these urban areas, keeping in mind the local contexts of those urban areas. So this is what the author has been telling us, right? So despite, as we have just discussed in the 7th schedule, right, so in the 7th schedule of the constitution, the urban development is part of the state list. So urban development is part of the state list, right? So in fact the state governments have the power to legislate on the matter which is included in the state list. So that is the urban development. So despite it is being in the state list, the union government has brought in number of flagship initiatives for the urban development. So what are those flagship initiatives that the union government has brought in? So we have to understand those flagship initiatives that the union government has launched. For example, we have just discussed those flagship initiatives. So smart cities program is one such flagship initiative, and second is Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, and the third flagship initiative is Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. And fourth initiative is Amrut, so Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation. So this is also another very important and flagship program for the urban development. And so these are some of the initiatives that the union government has launched for the development of the smart cities. However, if you look at urbanization in India right from 1990s, so during 1990s, India's urbanization has been primarily guided by several central schemes, and one such a very important central government scheme for the urban development after 1990s was Jawaharlal Nehru National Rural Renewal Mission. Right, so Jawaharlal Nehru National Rural Renewal Mission was one such flagship mission, and this mission aimed at the urban development. So urban development was the objective of this particular mission. However, more recently also the government has already launched various initiatives for the urban development. So these are some flagship initiatives that the government has recently launched. Remember that whenever you are writing an answer on urban development, it is very, very important that you should mention all these different programs for urban development. So that's how you could actually enrich your answer. That's how you can actually score good marks in the answer. And through all these programs, or through most of the programs, the primary objective of the central government, so what exactly is the primary objective of the central government? The primary objective is it focuses on infrastructure development. It focuses on infrastructure development in the urban areas plus the urban mobility. So these are the two focus areas of the central government. So no doubt that we have to improve the infrastructure, we have to reduce the logistic cost in India. So that is very, very high, and it discourages and disincentivizes manufacturing sector investments in India if we don't have a good infrastructure. And mobility is also very important. So because with mobility, generally what happens, people's reliance on the private transportation can be substantially reduced, and pollution levels could be substantially reduced, and traffic congestions can also be minimized with the mobility. However, so far when we talk about the urban development, the central government has been focusing on these two components only. So because in recent union budget, so metro rail projects have alone received more than 30% of the total funding for the urban areas, right? So if urban areas are being allocated for around so and so crore rupees, and within that allocated amount, 30% of the total funds are only for the metro rail projects. So therefore you can imagine how much importance the central government has been giving for the mobility. However, so all the initiatives that the central government has launched so far for the development of these urban areas, so it is being said that so they have given a very little or less room for the municipalities, right? So they have given a very less room for the municipalities, and they were created under the 74th Amendment Act, right? One thing that we should understand, that municipalities are not given adequate funds, adequate functionaries, and also adequate functions. And similarly, several parallel bodies have been created. Apart from several parallel bodies, the state governments have given exceptionally higher powers to the bureaucracy rather than these municipalities. So therefore, whatever programs that the central government has launched, those programs have given lesser importance to these municipalities or urban local bodies in the development and planning of urban areas. And this is the main problem that the author has been identifying. And here you could see some flagship initiatives that the government has launched, such as Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana for affordable housing, and Amrut Mission, this is Atal Mission for rejuvenation and urban transformation, and PM Shram Yogi Mandhan Yojana. So this is aimed at social protection of the unorganized sector workers, and those unorganized sector workers who are considered as more financially vulnerable. And the other programs such as PM Swanidhi for platform vendors or street hawkers has also been launched by the government. So these are some initiatives for the urban development. So however, the other thing that we should understand, what are the problems, what are the existing problems with this top down model? So we have just discussed that with respect to urban development in India, we have been following the top-down model instead of the bottom-up approach. So the problem is that in the top-down model, there is a lack of flexibility. So this flexibility is lacking in the top-down model, because in India, cities are very often forced to follow the centrally set rules and the formats, and that might not suit their conditions. And for example, each urban area, so each city in India, that may have its own rules, that may have its own formats, and that may have its own challenges and the developmental needs. But the central government's top-down model, the problem is that the central government has been forcing all these urban areas to follow the centrally set rules and formats all across the country, and this leads to one size fits all approach. So this has been leading to one size fits all approach, and that may not be suitable for all the urban areas in the country. And the second problem is mismatch of priorities is also another major issue that we have to talk about. Mismatch of priorities. So when we talk about the mismatch of priorities, now Swachh Bharat mission has been launched by the government, and that focuses on sanitation and hygiene, and most of the urban centers in India have a decent sanitation systems as of now. And Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is also focusing on a decent and most affordable urban housing as well. So this also focusing on urban housing. And Swachh Bharat Abhiyan is also focusing on sanitation and hygiene component in the urban areas. So we knew about that. But the problem is that the funding that the urban centers have been receiving for various sectors is very poor, right? So in fact, there are needs like mobility and climate resilience. So these are considered as actual needs. So climate resilience is considered as an actual need, and mobility is also considered as an actual need. So therefore these areas should also be prioritized. Particularly climate resilience in urban areas need to be given higher importance. Why? Because climate change has been resulting in a number of climate phenomena or natural disasters, and the vulnerability of the urban centers to these natural disasters has also been substantially increasing. So therefore, don't you think that there is a need to address this climate emergency and also build the climate resilience of these urban centers, because they are the growth centers, and if anything happens to these growth centers, India's economy will hit, and it will lead to the unemployment, and it will lead to the economic recession as well, right? So therefore we should consider the priorities. So what should be the priority areas that one should focus on? But for different cities we have a different priorities, and that is where we have been stressing on a localized planning in urban development, and this is very, very important, right? So we should actually focus on the localized planning, so that could address the local needs, local challenges in the urban development. And the other major problem with this top down model is that whatever money that has been allocated by the central government for various programs, so it is very often unspent, right? So it is actually spent on infrastructure which is not required. So that means the money is spent on unnecessary infrastructure, and this leads to the wasteful utilization or wasteful expenditure of the existing resources, right? So this can be seen in projects like smart cities project. So this has been observed in the smart city projects in India. So therefore overall, you can see that the top down model has resulted in the lack of flexibility for the respective state governments, respective urban local bodies. So that is the main problem, because the center has been enforcing a common set of rules and formats for the urban development. The second major problem is mismatch of priorities. So some urban bodies have different priorities, and some urban bodies have different priorities, right? For example, if I can say that states like Kerala, and if you observe the urbanization, so the urban centers are very often integrated themselves with the rural areas. So because that is the reason that once Kerala Chief Minister called one single city. Kerala Chief Minister called the state as a one single city. And what about cities like Ahmedabad? So if you look at the cities like Ahmedabad, the phenomenon is that the core of the city is very crowded. And because of that reason, the rich have been coming, or they are settling in the outskirts of the city. So each city has different priorities, and we need to consider those different priorities so that it will result in a sustainable urban development. And very often because of the mismatch of priorities, we are also wasting the crucial resources for the urban development. We have not been spending the resources in a right area. So that is also another major reason that has resulted in poor urban planning and poor urban governance, right? So in this context, so the other thing that we should talk about is, approximately 40% of India's population already lives in the urban areas, and this urban population is projected to reach to 675 million by the 2035, right? So 675 million urban population would live in the urban areas. And in fact, the urban population growth in India is about 2.3% annually. So around 2.3%, average growth has been registering, particularly increasing the urban population. So we have discussed 2011 census. Urban population in India is 29%. However, it is expected that this number would reach around 50 to 55% anywhere by the year 2035, because it has been registering an average growth rate of 2.3%. And we have already discussed that cities have been contributing around 55 to 60% of GDP, 55 to 60% of India's GDP. However, this number could increase anywhere between 65 to 70% of India's GDP is contributed by the urban centers alone. However, if you look at the global urban challenges, so this is not just the phenomenon at the global level, and even in India also. So there are certain urban challenges that we have been facing, right? So rapid urbanization, or mega cities, which have been increasing rapidly in recent times. So what are those mega cities? Those cities with population of more than 10 million. And in fact, the urban centers are very often considered as hotspots of poverty and social inequality that we observe in Indian urbanization as well, because there is a growth of slums in India. There is a growth of slums in India, and there is also a growth of inequalities in India, and poor waste management, sanitation challenges are also existing, and climate driven urban migration is also another major problem that the urban areas have been experiencing. Environmental pollution and loss of the green spaces in the urban areas, and urban centers are also becoming increasingly vulnerable to the climate impacts. Now remember one thing, that in UPSC mains examination you will get at least one question on the urbanization. So it is very important that you need to mention all these different points that we have discussed in the answer. So what are the suggestions that are actually provided to address the problems that the urban centers in India have been facing? So experts have provided a set of suggestions, and these suggestions have to be adopted in India's urban planning, and that would be resulting in sustainable urban development. And urban centers would also be very responsive when the government adopts these measures. So what are the suggestions? Firstly, we should be talking about the financial devolution. The problem in India with respect to the urban local bodies is a very, very poor devolution. So funds are not devolved, no functions, no functionaries. So therefore, it is suggested that at least 70% of the union budget funding that is allocated for the urban development, should be directly sent to the respective states and cities, right? For example, imagine that if the central government has allocated 100 crore in union budget for the urban development, so out of 100 crore, 70 crore should be directly sent to the respective state governments and cities, and this is what is called as the financial devolution, because each city have their own and different priorities, and this is in line with the bottom up approach, right? So this is in line with the bottom up approach. Since each city have their own priority, whatever funding that the central government has provided to these cities, so they can use to further improve or to further work on the existing priorities, and that would result in sustainable, equitable and inclusive urban development in India, right? So that is the first suggestion. And the second suggestion is the local plans, right? So we have to draw the localized plans or local plans, because cities themselves decide what they should require, be it housing, transportation, urban mobility, infrastructure development, water management, sanitation, hygiene, solid waste management. So the local bodies should decide what they require, right? So on which of the following that the local bodies they wanted to spend resources, they wanted to improve their capabilities, so it should be left to the respective local bodies alone. So that is what is called as the locally decided plans or local plans. So this is how the priorities of the local bodies can be addressed, and along with the priorities of the local bodies, so this is also in line with the bottom up approach. So bottom up approach, so instead of the top down approach. So in fact bottom up approach is considered as a more democratic in nature rather than the imposed version of top down approach. And similarly we should focus on the outcomes. So this is very, very important. So focus in the urban development should be shifted to the outcomes, right? So funds should not come with rigid rules. So for example, the center has been providing 100 crore for the urban development, so these funding should not come with any rigid rules that are attached to the funding. Rather, the central government should allow or should give more flexibility for the urban centers. So they should give more flexibility for the urban centers so that they can innovate at the local level, and it would also result in sustainable urban development as well. And there is also a need to avoid conditionality. So what exactly is conditionality? So when the government has been providing funding to the local bodies, so the funding is very often linked to some different areas. For example, increasing property taxes to getting funds, and there are different other areas. So solid waste management, implementation of Swachh Bharat mission, implementation of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana program. So this is how funding has been linked to the implementation of various welfare programs. So therefore the author has been suggesting that there is a need to avoid setting conditionalities, right? So commissions like 15th Finance Commission have added conditions like increasing property taxes, so if for example imagine that there's a municipal body A. So if municipal body A to receive funding from the central government, so it should actually perform better in collection of taxes, property taxes, better implementation of Awas Yojana, better implementation of Swachh Bharat mission, right? So those conditionalities will not provide flexibility for the urban local bodies. So therefore the author has been suggesting that there is a need to avoid such flexibility, and there is a need to ensure the bottom up approach when it comes to the urban planning and urban development. And similarly there is also a need to focus on localized planning, and that is how we can address the problems that the urban centers in India have been facing, right? So it is very important that the municipalities should also be adequately empowered by devolution of funds, finances and functionaries. So I hope you have understood and it is clear for you. So there are some remedies for the urban development, right? So these you can see here, for example, participatory governance in the urban areas, urban centers is very important, and one example is Pune Municipal Corporation's citizens view are taken into the budget preparation. And the reforms in urban planning, so 12th plan document and 74th constitutional amendment, capacity building and institutional reforms, particularly for the urban development, a creation of waste to energy authority, creation of employment opportunities for the women as well in the urban areas, and improved public services such as mohalla clinics in Delhi, and financial devolution, autonomy, for example the municipal bonds. So all these different suggestions can be followed for a sustainable urban development. Next is Indian cities heat action plans. So we are going to discuss what is a heat wave, and what are the reasons for the heat waves, and what is a heat action plan, and how Indian cities are prepared to deal with the heat wave that India is going to experience this summer, right? So first, initially we will discuss what is India heat action plans. A new study has been conducted, and this new study has recently revealed that most of the heat action plans in Indian cities, they fail to incorporate the long-term strategies. So there are no long-term strategies to tackle the heat waves in India. Now understand that with respect to heat wave, there are multiple problems, right? So health problems with heat wave, and secondly, it has been increasing the mortality rate of people because of heat stroke, and third, it has been reducing the economic productivity. So economic productivity is reduced because of the heat waves, right? So therefore, keeping this in mind, there is a need to come up with a heat wave action plans, and those heat wave action plans should focus on the long term strategies to adequately address all the issues which are associated with the heat wave, right? So therefore, when we have long term strategies to deal with the heat wave conditions, it could actually beat extreme heat, right? So it could actually beat extreme heat. And in fact, even cities with such strategies struggle with effective implementation, right? So even if they have a heat wave action plan in place, for example, cities like Delhi or cities like Ahmedabad, even if they have this heat wave action plans in place, so they very often struggle to implement those heat wave action plans, and that is the main problem it is highlighted. And in fact, the name of the study is India Ready for a Warming World. So the world has been warming quickly, and the intensity and frequency of heat waves is also increasing. And the report is also titled How Heat Resilience Measures Are Being Implemented for 11% of India's urban population in some of its most at-risk cities, was carried out by the Sustainable Futures Collaboration, and it is a New Delhi based organization, right? So this primarily aimed at how heat wave action plans are implemented in different urban centers in India, whether these urban centers have heat wave action plans, whether they have the short-term strategies and also the long-term strategies to deal with the heat waves, right? So what is the vulnerability of Indian cities to these heat waves? So this study actually looked into all these different dimensions, and in fact this study has already warned that the inadequate planning that we observe in Indian cities would lead to a more heat related deaths due to intensifying heat wave. So we have seen that due to intense heat wave conditions that we have in India, because of the global warming and climate change. The heat related deaths in India have been increasing substantially. So that is the main problem if we don't have any heat wave action plans. So first of all, we'll try to understand what is a heat wave. So heat wave is defined by the Indian Meteorological Department, right? So this is the definition of the heat wave. So Indian Meteorological Department says that heat wave is considered when maximum temperatures, when we have a maximum temperature, the maximum temperature of a particular place, right? So maximum temperature of a particular place touches at least 40 degree Celsius, at least 40 degrees Celsius. For example, imagine that there's a place called A, and in this particular place the maximum temperature is 40 degree Celsius, and on the other hand this place is also considered as plains. But on the other hand, hilly mountainous areas it is 37, in coastal areas it is 37 degrees Celsius, and hilly regions if they have maximum temperature of 30 degree Celsius, right? So this situation is called as heat wave, and this is the definition of heat wave that has been given by the Indian Meteorological Department, where the maximum temperatures reached to 40 degrees Celsius or more for plains, for the plain areas, and 37 degrees Celsius or more for the coastal regions, or more for the coastal regions, and 30 degrees Celsius or more for the hilly regions. And this is the actual definition of heat wave conditions that we observe in India. So I hope it is very clear. You just have to remember the definition of heat waves, and that has been provided by the Indian Meteorological Department. Now we'll understand what is a heat wave action plan, right? So what exactly is a heat wave action plan? So heat wave action plans are early warning and preparedness systems. So they are early warning as well as preparedness systems. For example, they indicate the vulnerability of a particular area to the heat waves. So how they are prepared to deal with these heat waves, and it essentially focuses on mitigation. It essentially focuses on what? Mitigation of the impact of extreme heat. Impact of extreme heat. So we have just discussed that heat wave related deaths are increasing in India. So therefore every city should have a heat wave action plan, and this heat wave action plan should have both short term as well as the long term strategies. So it should have both short term as well as the long term strategies that should be put in place. Only then we can consider that it is adequately prepared to deal with the oncoming heat wave. And in fact, the heat wave action plan should include immediate and long-term measures to enhance focusedness of preparedness, right? Because that focuses on the preparedness, and that also improves information sharing, and it would also result in coordinating responses. So coordinated response, improve information dissemination to different population groups, and adequate preparedness to deal with or to tackle with the heat wave like conditions. So thereby ultimately protecting people who are vulnerable to, who are highly vulnerable to the heat wave like conditions. So this is the ultimate objective of the heat wave action plans, and that is why the study has been highlighting that there is a need for the heat wave action plan. Now here on this image you can see what exactly causes a heat wave in any area. And one thing that you should understand, that heat wave is actually the result of trapped air. So for example, in this area, imagine that air is trapped in this particular area, and that would result in a heat wave like conditions, because heat wave, this air would have extremely high temperatures. It would have extremely high temperatures, and there is no place to escape for this particular air which is trapped, and because of that reason it would result in heat wave like conditions. So it would result in what? It would result in heat wave like conditions. Now we'll understand what are the specific causes of heat wave. So heat waves form when high pressure aloft, so around 33,000 to 7,600 meters, right? So for example, imagine that this is the place where the high pressure area has got developed, right? So a high pressure area has got developed at this particular altitude, and this high pressure area further strengthens, and this high pressure area also remains over the region for several days up to several weeks. And this high pressure area that has been formed here would actually prevents air near the ground from rising. So whatever air that is existing on the ground, so this air may not escape, this air may not rise up because of the high pressure systems that actually have. So how air flows from one area to another area? So air actually flows from the high pressure area to the low pressure area. So therefore the sinking air, so since air flows from the high pressure area to the low pressure area, the sinking air actually acts like a cap. So for example, the air which is sinking, it acts like a cap, so it will not allow the air at the ground level to escape. So since it has been acting like a cap, so the air is trapped at the ground level and air will not escape from that particular area, and over a period of time temperatures would started increasing, and that would create heat wave like conditions, right? So in fact, the higher concentration of pressure actually makes it difficult for other weather systems to move into the area, and in fact no other pressure systems can actually, or weather systems can actually come into this area because of the higher concentration of pressure, right? So other weather systems will not actually enter into that particular area because of the high concentration of the pressure here. So for example, imagine that if other weather systems comes into this area, and this trapped air in this particular region would become untrapped, and it would also become moderate in nature, but no other weather systems are coming into this particular region because of the high concentration of the area pressure. And that is why a heat wave can last for several days and even for several weeks, causing extreme and intense heat wave like conditions. And the high pressure actually inhibit the winds, and it also prevents clouds from entering the region. So clouds also may not be able to enter into this particular area because of the high pressure. It acts like a cap, and the sinking air also acts like a cap, and the trapped air may not escape from that area, and this high pressure area also prevents the clouds entering into that area. So the end result is a continual buildup of the heat at the surface, and that people experience as a heat wave. So I hope it is clear for you. So there's a continuous buildup of heat at the surface level, and that people experience as a heat wave, so that people also consider as a extreme temperatures. However, there are some key recommendations for the heat wave action plan. So it includes both immediate measures as well as the long-term measures, and those immediate and long-term measures need to be adopted, right? For example, when we talk about the immediate measures, so regular use of forecast and early warning systems, so that we can actually alert the people by disseminating information about the heat wave conditions. And second is public awareness campaigns is also very, very important about the heat wave related risks, so that people would remain cautious during those days when there will be an extreme heat wave like conditions. And for that, information, education and communication campaigns have to be taken up along with the knowledge dissemination on the heat wave conditions that are prevalent. Knowledge dissemination on heat wave conditions that are prevalent. And apart from that, in every urban centers there is a need to establish these urban shelters and also the cooling centers. Urban centers and cooling centers needs to be established in every urban area. And apart from that, there is a provision for providing free and clean drinking water for the people to prevent dehydration because of the intense heat wave like condition. So no doubt that, you know, in the months of April, May and for that matter June also, many days we might experience this heat wave like condition. So we need to be adequately prepared. So if we wanted to be adequately prepared, so we need to adopt both short-term measures as well as the long-term measures. Both short-term and long-term measures should be put in place to deal with these heat wave like conditions. And apart from that, we have to ensure that the hospitals are actually adequately equipped. So hospitals, primary healthcare centers, secondary healthcare centers, or most probably we should focus on the primary healthcare centers, and these primary healthcare centers should be adequately equipped with necessary supplies. They should be adequately equipped with necessary supplies and trained healthcare workers to handle heat related illness. However, there is also a need for adopting long-term strategies to deal with this heat wave conditions. For example, the urban planning initiatives such as tree planting and reduce heat impact, because afforestation or green spaces in urban areas may not be considered as a short-term measure because they actually take a lot of time, and that's why it is considered as a long-term strategy. But if we have increased green cover, increased forest cover and also increased green spaces in urban areas, so they could effectively deal with the issue of heat waves in the urban area. So therefore this is a most important element that has to be considered. And similarly, the focus should be on heat resistant building materials to counter the urban heat island effect. So urban heat island effect is also another phenomenon, and that results in intense extreme temperatures in the urban areas. So therefore what we have to do, we need to build heat resistant building materials. We need to use heat resistant building materials. So implementation of cool roofing technologies to lower indoor temperatures, and even strengthening coordination among government agencies, healthcare providers, community organizations, emergency services, but for better heat wave preparedness. So adequate collaboration is also very, very important. Adequate collaboration among all these different agencies is very, very important, and this forms part of the long-term strategy to deal with the heat wave like condition in India, right? So what are the key findings of the study? So the study has actually highlighted some key findings. For example, this study has actually found that the long-term actions were either absent or poorly implemented. So the governments or the urban governments are actually focusing on heat wave action plans with the short-term measures, but there is a need for a long-term actions. So these long-term actions to deal with the heat wave conditions are very often neglected. So therefore this is the area that should be focused on, and the long-term actions should include cooling solutions for the vulnerable people. So they are highly vulnerable. For example, urban shelters or heat wave shelters have to be constructed, and a provision for drinking water, clean drinking water should be provided for the vulnerable populations, and there should be safe spaces for these vulnerable populations. And the government should also consider insurance for lost work of these vulnerable populations, and there should be capacity building of the fire management services to deal with heat waves. And there is also a need for the electricity grid updates to prevent the failure of electricity grids because of the heat wave. And apart from that, there is also a need to work on increasing the urban shade, and also green spaces lacked a targeted approach. So there is a need to adopt a targeted approach for afforestation, increasing green cover, and also increasing tree cover in the urban spaces, so that these green spaces can actually protect the people from the extreme temperatures and even heat wave like conditions. So this should be considered as an important element in the heat wave action plans. And most long-term measures focused on strengthening healthcare responses, right? So how healthcare responsive to the heat waves rather than preventing heat related impacts at the first place. So this is also another major problem when it comes to dealing with heat wave like conditions. Similarly, the study has also highlighted that there is a lack of coordination between the municipal, district, state government, right? So lack of the interdepartmental, interministerial coordination. So this coordination is also lacking between different stakeholders, different institutions and agencies, and this is considered as a biggest obstacle for effective long-term heat action plan, and that has to be taken into account. And additionally, inadequate funding was a significant barrier. So this funding component should also be taken into consideration, and it should also be looked into. So the next important article is IOS Sagar, and this is considered as Made in India and Africa exercise. So we'll understand what exactly is this IOS Sagar. Now in fact, the Indian Ocean ship Sagar, right? So IOS Sagar is Indian Ocean ship Sagar, and this is a maritime security cooperation initiative in the southwest Indian Ocean region, right? So for example, this is Indian Ocean and this is the African continent, and this area is called as the southwest Indian Ocean region. And this Indian Ocean ship Sagar will focus on maritime security, in southwest Indian Ocean. And who are the participants in IOS Sagar? So India plus 9 African nations are participants of IOS Sagar. So those 9 African countries including Comoros, Kenya, Madagascar, Maldives, Mauritius, Mozambique, Seychelles, Sri Lanka and South Africa. So these are 9 participants of IOS Sagar that focuses on Southeast Asia, right? So in fact, there are some countries which are not part of Africa as well, such as Sri Lanka and even Mauritius. Sri Lanka and Maldives, not Mauritius. So in fact, there are some port of calls such as Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and Nakala Port in Mozambique, Port Louis, Mauritius, and Port Victoria, Seychelles, and Malé, Maldives. So you have to understand one thing, that in prelims examination very often these ports are asked. For example, if any port is in news, then it may be asked in your prelims examination. For example, one thing that we should understand, from Mozambique, the Nakala port is used for the export of pulses into India. So recently, the pulses exports from Nakala port in Mozambique, Mozambique has actually faced certain setbacks, right? So some armed groups prevented the export of pulses to India, and that has created some serious concerns with respect to the pulses availability in India. So therefore, Such things are very often asked in news, so you have to remember this Dar es Salaam port is located in Tanzania, Nakala port is located in Mozambique, Port Louis is located in Mauritius, and Port Victoria is located in Seychelles, and Malé port in Maldives. And in fact, this IOS Sagar will also focus on providing training for African personnel at the Indian Naval Institutions, Kochi, thereby covering naval operations, watchkeeping, and also the security drills as well. So this is part of building capacity of African naval forces, African security forces by the Indian security forces. Now we have to understand Sagar. Sagar is security and growth for all in the region, and this is an initiative that has been launched by India in the year 2015. So India has launched this initiative in the year 2015. Now Sagar actually aims at free, open, inclusive, peaceful, prosperous Indo-Pacific, and India's Sagar is actually aligned with the Indo-Pacific strategy of India, that is focuses on free, open, inclusive, peaceful, prosperous Indo-Pacific. And in fact, this Sagar initiative also focuses on countering growing Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean region. So we all knew that there has been an excessive growth of Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean region, and Sagar initiative also aimed at countering Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean region, and also further strengthening its collaboration and further strengthening its maritime relationship with other key littoral countries in the Indian Ocean region. And apart from that, Sagar will also focus on maritime security as well, particularly tackling piracy, terrorism, and also other illegal activities. Similarly, it focuses on capacity building, right, supporting Indian Ocean region countries in disaster preparedness, disaster management, and humanitarian assistance, and disaster relief and infrastructure development. And in fact, Mahasagar, so that is advancement for security across the regions, and this has been announced by PM Narendra Modi in Mauritius, focusing on maritime security and also the regional cooperation as well, right? So you can also see the significance of the Indian Ocean region. So in fact, Indian Ocean region is very important for India, and that is why we have been focusing on Indian Ocean excessively. For example, 95% of the India's trade by volume is carried out through the Indian Ocean, and 68% of the trade by value. And we also have some strategic importance or strategic significance or interest in the Indian Ocean region, because so it actually controls key maritime choke points such as Strait of Malacca, thereby boosting trade security of India. And it actually enhances India's naval security against piracy and other threats which are usually takes place in the Indian Ocean region. And India is also called as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean region, and we wanted to remain as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. So for that reason also, IOR is a very, very important region for India. And apart from that, the regional influence, such as we have to strengthen India's role in the Indo-Pacific region, and we wanted to become a net security provider as well. So this is IOS Sagar, and this is going to be a maiden exercise between India and many other African countries. And now we'll understand what exactly is a finance bill and what is the difference between finance bill and money bill as part of our prelims bites, right? So recently, union budget has been discussed, right? So in order to withdraw funds out of the consolidated fund of India, this finance bill has to be passed. Now we'll understand what is exactly a finance bill. Now finance bill is considered as a very important part of the union budget, and it is introduced every year. So if the government wanted to withdraw money from the consolidated fund of India, so this finance bill has to be passed, and that is why it is considered as a very, very important part of the union budget. And in fact, the financial bill will help implement the government fiscal proposals. So it actually consisting of government's fiscal proposals, and in fact it also authorized the government taxation, expenditure, revenue adjustments for the upcoming financial year. So these are the important elements that the finance bill actually consists of. And in fact article 110 clause A of the constitution mandates that finance bill be presented with the budget. So along with the union budget, this finance bill should also be presented, and in fact it should be accompanied by a memorandum explaining the tax provisions by the union government. So on this image you can clearly see the differences between the money bill, financial bill, and within financial bill there are two different categories of financial bill category A and financial bill category B, right? So if you can look into this money bill, so money bill deals with matters which are listed in article 110 clause 1 subclause A to subclause G, right? So it actually deals with these different aspects. For example, imposition of taxes, abolition of taxes, remission of taxes, alteration of taxes, and regulation of central, state taxes and local taxes. So all these areas are dealt through the money bill. And in fact if central government has been planning to borrow money, then also it deals with money bill. And if central government wanted to withdraw or receipt of money from the consolidated or contingency fund of India or public account of India, then also it is considered part of the money bill. And apart from that, so money bill can be introduced only in the Lok Sabha by so for example we have Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha in the parliament. However, whenever a money bill is introduced, so this money bill should be introduced in Lok Sabha only, it should not be introduced in the Rajya Sabha. And in fact president's prior recommendation is required for introducing money bill. For example, when the government has been planning to introduce a money bill, then this money bill should be introduced after prior recommendation of the president. So the government actually requires the prior recommendation of the president, and only then this bill should be introduced into the Lok Sabha. And it can be only a government bill. So what does it mean? No private member can actually introduce a money bill. Only a council of ministers, a member from the council of ministers only allowed to introduce this money bill. And in fact with respect to money bill, Rajya Sabha have a limited powers, right? So they have a limited powers with respect to the money bill. And in fact once it is passed in the Lok Sabha and passed on to the Rajya Sabha will have to return the bill within the 14 days. So if Rajya Sabha don't return the bill within the 14 days, then it will be considered as passed by the Rajya Sabha. And in fact president can withhold his assent, but he cannot return the bill for the reconsideration. Rather he can withhold his assent, right? So president can actually withhold his assent, but he cannot return the bill. And in fact there is also no provision for a joint sitting, and in fact joint sitting is also not required for the money bill because Rajya Sabha has a limited powers with respect to this bill. And a money bill cannot be returned for the reconsideration by the president, right? So that is with respect to money bill. And financial bills are two different types, right? So 117 clause 1 and 117 clause B, right? So those financial bills which are part of category A, they are listed in article 117 clause 1 of the constitution. Secondly, a bill that contains some provisions related to taxation of expenditure and additionally contains provisions related to any other matter is called as financial bill, and it should be introduced only after the recommendation of the president in Lok Sabha. And once it is passed in the Lok Sabha, and it becomes like an ordinary bill, and Rajya Sabha has all powers to reject the bill or amend the bill, and it is not like a money bill where Rajya Sabha have limited powers, and there can be a joint sitting of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha with respect to financial bill category A. But what is the financial bill category B? So it is categorized as financial bill under Article 117 clause 1, and it is an ordinary bill in all respects, right? So this is considered as an ordinary bill in all respects, and in fact both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha has equal powers, so they are having equal powers with respect to financial bill category B, and recommendations of the president is needed, and it also involves expenditure from the consolidated fund of India, and it can be introduced in the either house of the parliament, right? Now, but the other thing that we should understand, that financial bill category A should be introduced only in the Lok Sabha, but financial bill category B can be introduced in Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, right? So that is the difference that you should understand here. Anyway, that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. And if you like our lecture, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.